Hi guys, welcome back to the Moaning Yorkshireman and welcome back to a sort of returning series. The only difference is now it's the crawl room, not quite the crawl wall. No room for a wall anymore, a big massive board with the points on. We're going to do it all electronologically. Isn't that clever? Anyway, as you can see, we're in this ranty room. It's been 217 days or whatever it is since we last turned a wheel in anger. And finally Formula 1 is back, kicking things off in style at Austria. And what can we say? A fantastic race, some amazing performances up and down the field, a lot of reliability issues, but some things never change in Formula 1. You're always going to see a Williams pay driver binning it off into a wall in a practice session. You're always going to see inconsistent penalties with the FIA. Is it a penalty? Is it not? Well, Max got 3rd place grid drop in Mexico, but Hamilton, well, he's blessed. He's blessed. We best not let him... give him a penalty for that. Best not give him a penalty. Oh, we will. Half an hour before a race. We will. 3rd place grid drop. He's starting 5th. And of course, Sebastian Vettel spinning during a race. Absolutely sensational stuff. F1 is well and truly back. So we're going to kick things off in the finishing order of the race positions, and I'm going to rate them all as I see fit. We're going to score them, as always, if you've never seen the crawl wall before or what it's all about. We're going to score the drivers out with a maximum of 10 points, the lowest of 0. If they have a particularly good race, I can give them bonus points. If they have a particularly bad race, I can give them minus points. And generally, I'm going to score them whatever I like because it's my series and it's just a bit of a joke, so calm your tits, everyone. I know it's been mental these last few months with everyone being offended by absolutely everything, but promise you, this is just to make a light-hearted joke of a situation that is Formula 1. It doesn't need to be serious. Okay, let's kick things off then. So we're going to kick things off with Valtteri Bottas, the race winner. And what can we say about Valtteri? Pole position. Wasn't expecting that at all. I thought Hamilton's got the measure of him. He was P1 in every practice session. And yeah, I just thought, fair enough, he's got it. Hamilton's going to be pole, probably going to get an easy win. No, I was wrong. Bottas on pole position, just by a fraction of a second, but just enough. And that makes all the difference. And then in the race, pretty much led every lap, didn't he? I think he did lead every lap, actually. He would have done, wouldn't he, because of the safety car period and stuff? Yeah. So fantastic, really, you know, performance by Bottas. Verstappen applied pressure to him early on. And then obviously in the latter stages where there was apparently gearbox issues for both Mercedes, both got taught to keep off the curbs. Both cars are in the same position. Hamilton was questioning it, saying, well, he's hitting the curves more than I am. But Bottas, yeah, he made it to the end and he ultimately won the race. What can we say? A perfect performance for a perfect weekend. The Mercedes is dominant though, isn't it? It is dominant. It was a 1-2. But, yeah, penalties are penalties out there for Hamilton. But nonetheless, we're talking about Bottas. When I heard that Valtteri, it's James, I thought, oh no, here we go again. We're going to get Lewis Hamilton through. He needs to win the race. But thankfully it wasn't. It was just to tell him to stay off the curbs, calm it down. And he did. So, Bottas, fantastic performance. It is going to be 10 points for Valtteri Bottas. Congratulations, Valtteri. Next up is, of course, Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. Now, they were dog shit in practice, they were dog shit in qualifying, and they looked like they were going to be dog shit in the race. They certainly benefited from the retirements ahead, such as the likes of Verstappen, without a doubt. But you can't take that away from Leclerc's impeccable performance to get that lump of lard up onto 2nd place and on the podium. Incredible race by Charles. Absolutely fantastic. Probably one of the best races of his career, without a doubt. Amazing drive. Amazing drive, actually. You think about it, you think, God, they were nowhere. They were absolutely nowhere. But the safety car periods came into play. Some cars pitted, some cars didn't for the additional stop. So some decided to go for track position as opposed to pitting for the tyres. And yeah, it just worked an absolute treat for Leclerc. And fair play to him, a credit to him. He did an amazing job to pick up 18 points today and a thoroughly deserved 2nd place. I've not got a bad word to say about the kid, to be honest with you. Absolutely impeccable performance, and that is also going to be 10 points. The car is shit because it's now legal. All the Ferrari cars have lost pace over winter. None of the other teams have. Surprising. But yeah, absolutely impeccable performance by Charles Leclerc, and it's going to be 10 points. Then we come to my man Lando. What can we say about Lando? He's on the podium. He did absolutely everything he could to benefit from Hamilton's 5-second time penalty at the end there. And he belted in the fastest lap, so he picked up a point for that as well. And he finished ahead of him by just 0.2 of a second. He pushed and pushed and pushed. Unbelievable racing. A brilliant talent is Lando. amazing. He's finally proved his worth. Everyone's saying, oh, he's the same as Stroll. He's practically a pay driver. Get off your high horse. He's proved himself now. Get in the bin. But yeah, amazing, amazing performance by Lando. It looked like the Racing Point had the measure of the McLarens definitely for most of the race. Obviously, the Mercedes certainly did. The Red Bulls, had it not been for their dramas, they'd have been finishing ahead. But they were there to pick up the pieces. The latter stages of the race, of course, it looked like Sainz and Norris were having a battle. I was like, no, what are you doing, the pair of you? You're going to cost yourself a podium here with the 5 seconds. But it was crucial to Lando's race, that. If he'd have let Sainz through, it'd have been Sainz potentially getting the podium, or Sainz have held him up with older tyres. You just have to roll the dice with these things, and you think, well, this is a fight worth fighting, and he certainly did, and it proved to be the benefit this time around, and he got 3rd place on the podium. He's on the podium. It's fucking amazing. I had a tear in my eye when he crossed the line. A great lad. Fantastic. And I'm going to award him 15 points! He's getting 15 points. It's not so cruel, this, at the minute, is it? But we get him there. And as a little celebration to Lando Norris, I'm just going to take a swig of milk. He loves his milk, our Lando, doesn't he? So, here we go. A shot of milk for him there. Congratulations, buddy. P3. Next up, we of course have Lewis Hamilton, or Lewis Ramilton as he should be known as. Of course, people are going to say now, well, you've got no right to criticise the FIA. They gave him 2 bullshit penalties. Well, no, not really. Red Bull had a right to appeal that penalty that wasn't a penalty initially, and give him a penalty because he did display yellow flags as clear as day. It was on the footage. The footage wasn't available to the FIA yesterday. It was available today. Red Bull protested it. Fair enough. Don't go crying about it. And then in the race, took out Albon again. Twice now. That's twice. Albon, I think, just needs to calm it down a little bit. It was on the soft tyres. He didn't need to get it done there and then. It could have bided his time that little more and just waited until he had an opportunity to go up the inside to make it safer. But that wasn't Albon's fault. It was verging more on the side of a racing incident, but I think the way that Hamilton just kind of lazily just went into him, he could have backed off it a little bit, touched the brake a little bit harder, could have come off the throttle a little bit more, and could indeed have turned a little bit more to the right. He did everything he could, but it wasn't enough. I think he was just trying to force Albon onto the gravelly bit just so he could get the momentum out the corner, but it wasn't to be. So a rightful penalty in my eyes. So yeah, a 5-second penalty was issued to Lewis Hamilton, and ultimately Albon did retire from the race. Was that as a result of the contact? Not knowing at the time of recording. Could have been, but I'm going to say not. So maybe Albon was always destined to break down anyway. So, what do I give Hamilton? Well, he got a 5-second time penalty in the race. He did line up 5th and benefited from, Verstappen's retirement. He passed Lando Norris and, of course, he passed Perez with relative ease. Bearing in mind he had the quickest car, but just didn't quite have the match for Bottas. He was told to ease off as well. And yeah, I'm going to give him -5. -5 points to Lewis Hamilton. You ruined Albon's race again. I mean, I'm not fully blaming you, but it was more your fault. Albon was ahead. So yeah, -5 to Lewis Hamilton. Then we come to Carlos Sainz, and what could be said about Carlos Sainz? He always has a quiet race, whether he has an exciting one. We never saw him on the podium at Brazil, did we? Do you know what I mean? It's stuff like that. He's never really on camera. But for what he did and how he played it, and he did all right. A solid 5th place finish for Sainz would not be sniffed at. But Norris had the measure of him this weekend, qualified better than him even without Hamilton's penalty. And of course then in the race just outdrove him. They had that little spat towards the end of the race which Norris got the better of him and ultimately finished P5. It was a shame the McLarens did battle like they did because otherwise Sainz could have jumped ahead of Hamilton as well and got the team an extra crucial 2 points. But it wasn't to be, and that's racing, and that got Norris the podium. So a bit strange to see Sainz ever so slightly off the pace in comparison to Norris, but Norris has proven his worth now, and not to be sniffed at. If someone said to Sainz, look, you're going to get 5th this weekend, I think he'd have took that all day long, bearing in mind how strong the racing points were looking. So I'm going to score Carlos Sainz a nice, decent 7 points. I think that's fair. Not a perfect weekend, but not the best weekend he's had in Formula 1. So 7. Then we come to Sergio Perez, and what can be said about him? He had a decent race. The race looked promising. Looked like he was on for a podium at times. But I think it was more the strategy that let him down this time as opposed to the overall race pace. He certainly had the pace in the car himself. He was doing well. He was delivering. Strategy wasn't quite there, and yeah, he did speed in the pit lane and got in that 5-second time penalty. So even if he had done the pit lane, had he had the stop and matched what the McLaren and Norris did and Leclerc did, then potentially he could have finished ahead of him, but with that 5-second penalty, would he have got the measure on him? We'll never know, sadly. But I do think he was let down more by the Racing Point strategy as opposed to himself. So, for that reason, I'm going to give Sergio Perez a decent, solid 7 points as well. We're going to match him with Sainz. Brilliant weekend by him. Racing Point looking strong, maybe not shown the true colours. But yeah, to see him up there running up there for a while was certainly nice to see. And yeah, it looks like we're going to have a fantastic midfield battle once again this year, and it's going to be involving the Ferraris as well. So the more the merrier in the midfield. Just a shame we've got no one challenging for the top just yet. Then we come to Pierre Gasly, and what could be said about him? A quiet race. We didn't really see much of either of the Alpha Tauris, did we, for Kvyat or Gasly, to be honest. But Gasly, quiet race, but he qualified just outside the top 10, so elected to go on the mediums like everyone else did outside the top 10. And yeah, made it work for him. They did a brilliant race, just running their own race, just on the cusp of points every time, just on the edge. And in the end, with all the retirements ahead, fantastic performance, and he finished in P7. Well-earned points, well-deserved, kept it clean, kept it tidy, benefited from the retirements ahead. So, fantastic performance, can't fault you, Gasly. That's a solid 8 points you're getting for that weekend. Brilliant weekend, solid enough. Let's see if we can build on it. Then we come to Esteban Ocon, the returning Esteban Ocon. Who could forget? It's been nearly 2 years since he was last in a Formula 1 car racing in anger. Crazy stuff. He'll have been eager for this season to carry on and get underway. But yeah, it's been a difficult weekend, let's admit it. Without those retirements, he wouldn't have been in the points this weekend at all. He even benefited from the likes of the Haas's retiring. That's how low down he was in the pecking order. He qualified 14th in the end, I think, and yeah, was well outside the Q3 times where Ricciardo got in. And then running in the race, he was always around that 12th to 14th area, not quite getting inside the top 10, and struggled really, it must be said. It was a difficult return for him. Ricciardo was doing ever so slightly better, but the car didn't look like it had the pace anyway until Ricciardo ultimately broke down. And yeah, for Ocon, okay, a return to form, a return back to racing. He got in the points, like I said, benefited from pretty much everyone that retired though ahead of him. Without that, he'd have been around 12th, 14th. He wouldn't be getting points today. So that's to be bared in mind. Hopefully he'll come on stronger next weekend when we race again at Austria for the second time, build his confidence back up and hopefully get in the points when there's a lot more finishing cars. So for that reason it's going to be a middle of the road 5. Middle of the road 5 for Ocon. Then we come to Giovinazzi, our Antonio Giovinazzi. He finished in P9, did our Antonio. Did an okay job. The Alphas look mightily off the pace, don't they? Mightily off the pace. Both out in Q1, finishing behind Russell, and Antonio was 18th. So to finish in 9th was fantastic effort, but again, he just kept it clean and tidy. And yeah, without all the retirements, he'd have not been in the points this weekend. But having said that, he kept it honest, he kept it fair. Had a nice little scrap in the early part of the races with Kimi. Kimi looked like he had ultimate pace though over Giovinazzi, and I think it was pretty much team orders led him through there. It certainly didn't make life too difficult for Kimi. Out-qualified Kimi though, it has to be said, in the Saturday qualifying session. So that's something to bear in mind, but overall, the Alpha's not looking strong. That Ferrari engine that's now legal in the back of it is certainly not doing very well. It's not a good workhorse anymore. The prancing horse has fucked off and they've just stuck a camel in there or something. But yeah, it's not doing well, is it? So what will I give Giovinazzi? I'm going to give him 5 as well. Middle of the road 5. I don't think he was doing anything special this weekend, partly because of the car. But yeah, he kept it honest, he kept it clean. 5 points. Then we come to Sebastian Vettel picking up the final point in P10 after a spin. You spin me right round, baby, right round like a record, baby, right round, round, round. That's right, it's dead or alive, and wow, his hopes of ever getting a Formula 1 seat again are dying by the second, aren't they? Another spin, a stupid lunge up the inside of Sainz. What was he thinking? He was never. That door was always closing. Always closing. It wasn't even fully alongside him. He just sort of like, oh shit, I'm going to hit him. I'll spin. And round he went again. He got knocked out in Q2, but again, I know the Ferrari's shit. Leclerc got into Q3 though, so that has to be bared in mind. A teammate out-qualified him, regardless of the shit car. And yeah, what can be said about him? Meh. Meh. 0. He spun. It's a 0. I'm sorry. it's just a 0. Then we come to the last finisher across the line. There was more 2 classified finishers that didn't make the line, sadly. But the last finisher was Nicholas Latifi, finishing P11 just outside the points for Williams. What can be said about Latifi? He had that crash in free practice 3. Qualifying, he was 6th, 10th off his teammate on a circuit that's quite small. But he was just getting up to pace, really. I think that crash knocked his confidence. Now, I'm not going to go slagging him off, and I'm not going to go laying into him for being a pay driver at Williams and doing shit straight away, because I did that with Sorokin, and I admit I got it wrong with him back in 2018. So what can be said for Latifi? It's a weekend he needs to build on. If he'd have got points, then wow, it'd have been amazing. But again, it was obviously because of the retirements. But 11th place, a solid finishing position. Can't be argued with that. He had to keep it clean, but unfortunately he kept it clean because he wasn't really around anyone, was he? So I'm going to give him, I think 4's too much, but I think 3's too harsh. I'm going to give him 3.8. I think that's decent. So a 3.8 out of 10 for Latifi. Then we come to Daniel Kvyat, the last of the cars to technically retire from the race, although he did get classified. Yeah, he was doing sort of the same as Gasly, really, wasn't he? It didn't really feature much in the race until he did have that slight bit of contact with Vettel going into the turn 3, as they call it, although it's turn 2. Going into turn 3, and it did just jump ever so slightly the car, and I wonder if that's what caused the suspension failure on his car. But apart from that, he was clinging on for dear life to hold on to those points. So yeah, I don't think he'd have got the points anyway. He dropped outside the points when Vettel got past him for P10. Yeah, an unfortunate race, and yeah, he ended up out the race, sadly, classified P12, however. A mid to lonely race, qualified just outside the top 10, was getting outraced by Gasly, although they were fairly close together all race. So, you know, you can't always be alongside each other being dead equal, can you? So for that reason, I'm going to score Kvyat 6 points. A character building weekend for him, and hopefully he can develop from there. Then we come to Alex Albon. Albon, what can I say? Oh, it looked like he could win, didn't it? We're never going to know, or I'm not going to know at time of recording, if that collision with Hamilton did him with the damage which ended up making him retire, or whether he was retired from the lead anyway. But yeah, unlucky Albon. Should have maybe bided his time a little bit more and waited for an opportunity to go up the inside as opposed to attacking around the outside. But it was a legitimate move, and it was more than on. Albon was ahead when the contact happened, so it has to be Hamilton's penalty. And they've collided again whilst having a battle for a podium. I really hope this isn't the start of things to come, and I really hope he's not going to be the next Hülkenberg. Because again, he's proved his worth. Okay, he was a little bit behind at Verstappen in qualifying and a little bit behind in the early parts of the race. But he's got Verstappen as a teammate, and I think he delivered a solid job this weekend. Did as best he could as a second driver. Let's not forget the swap wings around as well. Verstappen got Albon's wing after Verstappen damaged his own. So, you know, he's a clear number 2 there, and he was doing a solid number 2 job. The Red Bull strategy was spot on by pitting him onto those soft tyres as well, behind safety car, which gave him the chance to overtake Hamilton. So, all in all, I'm gutted for him. I'm really gutted for him. Yeah, I'm going to give him a solid... I'm going to give him a solid 7.5, 7.5 points. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think he should have just bided his time a little bit more to get up the inside of Hamilton as opposed to going for a move around the outside. It wasn't his fault that his collision was there, but just bide your time. You're on a lot fresher tyres, and the Mercedes were struggling with pace. So, yeah, 7.5, I think that's fair. Next up, we have, of course, the first of the classified retirements, and that is Kimi Räikkönen. What can we say about Kimi? Had an okay race. It'd have definitely been in the points without a doubt. Obviously, he was running around with Gio's pace, Giovinazzi. The swap positions early on in the race after battling with each other looked a bit like team orders to me. Giovinazzi letting Räikkönen through. Räikkönen looked like he was quicker in pace. And yeah, had the dramatic wheel nut failure or potentially not put on right in after the pit stops. It was looking an interesting race for Kimi. Definitely points were available, of course. Yeah, it'd have certainly been around the Giovinazzi, Gasly kind of range, definitely without that wheel nut failing or the wheel flying off in dramatic style just as it came round to the safety car restart, wasn't it, potentially? They're all getting ready to go. We came round the last corner and then wheel flew that way. And luckily there were no crowds, there was no one to injure really, so that was lucky. It stayed within the confines of the track though, which is all good. But potentially more of a pit stop error as opposed to a wheel nut failure, although it did go round for a couple of laps, so maybe it just wasn't slightly clenched on right on the wheel nut. But yeah, one of those things, unfortunately. Definitely be a fine for Alfa if it's obviously proven to be a problem, a mistake in the pits as opposed to a failure. Kimi, I think I would say he did a better job than Giovinazzi in the race just based on the overall pace. He was out-qualified by Giovinazzi, but when you're 18th and 19th, it doesn't really make much of a difference, unfortunately. Although, big kudos to Giovinazzi for getting the points at the end of the race and, of course, out-qualifying your teammate. Raikkonen, I'm going to score him 5.5 out of 10. I'm going to give him ever so slightly more than Giovinazzi. The Ferrari engine's off the pace, unfortunately, as we've mentioned. It is now a legal engine in it rather than an illegal engine. And Alfa have lost 1.1 seconds compared to last year, which is dreadful. And you're not telling me that's all car. Next up we have George Russell, and what can be said about him? He had a fantastic race overall. He was ahead of Latifi, he was ahead of a couple of cars as well. He was ahead of a Grosjean, he was ahead of obviously Vettel after his spin. He was also battling around with the likes of the Alphas, so more than respectable. He out-qualified the Alphas as well in qualifying, which is well worth a solid shout-out mention. A massive improvement for where they were last year. And in the end, I think it was a sensor failure for his car. There was a lot of failures this weekend, but I think it was ultimately a sensor failure which knocked his car off and he had to retire. Points would have been possible this weekend for him, without a doubt. Considering how much faster he was compared to Latifi, and Latifi finished 11th, points would have been there once again for George, but not to be this time. Hopefully next weekend it can deliver a little bit more. I'm going to score George a solid 8 points. He's getting 8 points as our George. I think he did a solid effort. Then we come to the Haas pairing of Roman Grosjean and K-Mag, both retired as a result of brake failure in the end. K-Mag was very lucky not to have a massive accident, actually, doing it at the top of turn 3 with his brake failure, but he spun it and just kept it out of the barriers. And as for Grosjean, he had a spin prior, and then he had another off at the same corner, but this time it was a result of brake failure. And yeah, I'm not really sure what can be said about that, to be honest. It was an unfortunate race for Haas. Haas were nowhere, really. Grosjean did get into Q2, which was an honourable mention, considering I was expecting them to both be out in Q1. But K-Mag had the measure on him in the race, before the spin even. K-Mag was running around just outside the points, 11th, 12th, 13th, that sort of area, whereas Grosjean, prior to the spin, was down in 17th anyway, and then he spun. So, Roman Grosjean, he's the next on my list, but Roman Grosjean, I'm going to score him 4 out of 10. The spin was silly. Once again, another feature of Formula 1. But yeah, ultimately it wasn't his fault he went out. And as for K-Mag, the race pace was there, but his qualifying pace wasn't there to be out-qualified by his teammates. So he's also... I'm going to be slightly more... I'm going to give K-Mag 4.5, because I think maybe he could have scraped a point had he not broken down himself and all the chaos had carried on. So, yeah. I think 4.5, just a little bit more. I think he got more chance of getting points than Grosjean today. Then we come to the almighty talented Lance Stroll. That's right, he's a pay driver, but he's just as good as Lando Norris. Well, he wasn't this weekend, was he? Qualified out in 9th place, which he got into Q3. Wow! A car that's able to get into Q3. He actually got it into Q3. Let's all hail him as a hero. And then in the race, it looked like he had problems early on with engine issues, so I can't really rate his race pace because we're not sure when that actually started kicking in, but he was always running round in 8th or 9th. Nothing ever better than that. But Perez had the measure of him. Perez out-qualified him, was out-racing him. Yeah, so what can be said? I'm going to give Stroll a middle-of-the-road 5. We're not sure when that failure kicked in. It could have been from really early on, and we just learnt later on in the race about the issue. So I'm going to give him 5 points on the pretences of that. But he does need to book his ideas up and get that qualifying pace sorted out. I know he might have got caught out by the yellows, but I couldn't have seen him going up any further than that. So yeah, we're going to give Stroll 5 points. Then we come to Daniel Ricciardo, the Renault driver that looked like he was just on the cusp of points and then broke down. Water temperature issues, I believe it was, with Daniel Ricciardo's car. Yeah, he'd have definitely got points today. He'd have probably been around where Gasly was, 6th, 7th, somewhere like that. So solid enough effort. Yeah, got into Q3, which was okay. It was good, but it's not fantastic from Renault. And we need to see that a bit more, definitely, with Renault. We need to see him getting into Q3 a lot more, with Ocon as well. And the reliability just needs to be there for Ricciardo. Points were possible this weekend for him. but there weren't, sadly, with the issues. So I think Ricciardo was 6 points is solid enough. I think he was doing a decent enough job, and had the chaos ensued and he'd been in the race, points were certainly possible. But that's racing, isn't it? That is racing. So 6 points for Daniel Ricciardo. And last but by no means least is, of course, Max Verstappen. And what could be said for Max? He didn't have a chance to prove what the strategy was capable of. He went for something different in Q2 and went on the medium tyres, which thankfully paid off for him, and he got through into Q3. Only just, but he did. Of course, he got promoted to P2 then as a result of Hamilton's penalty. And in the race, he set off, tried to make a charge at Bottas, couldn't quite do it, maintained P2 until eventually his car had a gear selection issue or something. It was like the car was almost stuck in anti-stall, as Max reported on the radio there. And yeah, it was just what could have been. We're never going to know if that strategy would have been able to leapfrog him ahead of the Mercedes. And obviously with all this craziness that happened in the race, Albon with that strategy could have potentially paid off for him, and he could have ended up winning. So there was a strong chance there for Red Bull to score some big points today and potentially leapfrog Mercedes, especially when it came to, can you be careful on the gearbox, guys, avoid the curbs from Mercedes. So Verstappen so unlucky, but a fantastic effort in qualifying. He got the best he could have got easily. You know, the Mercedes are just too fast over a 1-lap pace. And in terms of the race overall, it was doing what he needed to do, maintain the position to Bottas, you know, keep the gap, you know, don't make the gap stretch out too far to Bottas, just keep it a nice constant 3 seconds, something like that. Keep in touch with him, and then the tyre life comes into play. And he did all of that. So I'm going to score him a solid 8 out of 10. Not quite going to give him big points because obviously we never know what he was going to be capable of, but judging by what Albon did later in the race after all the craziness and the additional pit stops, Red Bull would have got that strategy spot on, just like they did with Albon for Verstappen, and Verstappen could have potentially won today, but we're never going to know, sadly. Well, there you go, guys. That was the first ever Cruel Room, not Cruel Wall, remember, Cruel Room. And yeah, it's sort of a returning series. I decided to do it after you guys loved the F1 driver ratings so much that Co-Masters had done and everyone were crying about them. And I did my own. It got quite a lot of response and everyone's like, this is Cruel Wall vibes. And I thought, you know what? It's been a difficult year. Let's bring something back that's going to cheer everyone up. So I hope you did enjoy this video, guys. Let me know your thoughts and feedback down below. Would you have scored any drivers higher, any lower? What was your opinions on the racing incidents that happened today? And yeah, do you think Russell would have scored points in the Williams had he not broke down? Just let me know everything down below. And I look forward to responding and replying to as many of you as I can. And yeah, it's good to be back. Formula 1 ranting, it's where it belongs, on the Moaning Yorkshireman. So thanks a lot for watching, guys, and much love.